Tonight, big show, another bizarre court decision against the big gas project. Traditional owners now claiming it's a global warming menace. Also tonight, footage you aren't shown from Gaza. Israel is supposedly starving it into surrender. So why does the Israeli military footage show a market in the south of Gaza that looks like this? Also tonight, Brittany Higgins checks into hospital again with mediation talks now adjourned. What's going on with Australia's most famous case of alleged rape? And I'll nominate my Whiskey of the Week and Book of the Week for the well-read Conservative. And not just them. But first, we now know what Sam Kerr allegedly called a police officer, and she's actually done us a huge favour. She's made the left here, Labor, the ABC, confront their hypocrisy. I mean, you know, saying racism is so terrible, but not if it's racism against whites. Now, Sam Kerr is, of course, the captain of the Australian women's soccer team, a superstar. But last year, police in London were called to deal with her after she allegedly threw up in the back of a taxi. There was a dispute about the fare, I assume because the driver wanted money for the clean-up. And Kerr allegedly, reportedly, called a police officer a stupid white bastard. She's now been charged with racially aggravated harassment. I should stress, she says she is innocent. And people today obsessed with race politics, this popular race politics now, might assume, of course, she's innocent. Isn't she non-white herself, thanks to one grandparent on her father's side who's Indian? And didn't she pose with the Aboriginal flag and join the Black Lives Matter movement?
Racism has been around for far too long.
In fact, she was insisting only a few months ago in a gay pride push that we let people be comfortable in their skin.
Everyone should feel comfortable in whatever skin they want to be, whoever they want to be.
I've never actually bought the idea that flying the Aboriginal flag or joining the Black Lives Matter movement made you anti-racist. Maybe the opposite, because for many, those things seem more about getting their preferred race more power. It was about the side, it wasn't about the principle. And that explains the confusion on the ABC today.
Sam Kerr apparently is being accused of calling a police officer a white bastard. I presume the officer is white. Is that racist or not?
Now, the obvious answer is, of course, yes, it is racist. Yet, when Labor ministers were asked today, it seemed to be no.
I wouldn't be offended. I have to say, Sam Kerr's a great Australian. You know, a great Australian. The Matildas did so much for women's sport, and Sam Kerr's role in that and the lead up to that was absolutely magnificent. This occurred in the same week that she scored 3 match-winning goals for Chelsea.
I mean, Sam Kerr's a great Australian and a hero, but I'm not going to comment on a court case on the other side of the world, which, you know, I've only just heard about from you. But, you know, I think we would all be wishing Sam Kerr the best.
A hero. Kerr's boss at her Chelsea club was also incredibly supportive.
You know, Sam has our full support. She knows that.
The Prime Minister yesterday also backed her, and the very woke fiction editor of the taxpayer-funded Overland literary magazine tweeted on hearing what Kerr had actually said, "I'm feeling even more pro-Sam Kerr than I did before." So, calling someone a stupid white bastard is not racist, or it's completely forgivable, or you're a hero, or even great. Great. But of course, if you said stupid black bee, your career would be destroyed. And ABC stars like Tracy Holmes today admitted that a double standard does apply in the eyes of many.
Most people would think about racism in some sort of a power imbalance scenario. So we'd be talking about minorities and marginalised groups, not the group that is most dominant.
Okay, she's saying many people think you can't actually be racist to a white person. But that's not just hypocritical. I also suggest it's racist thinking. People who think like that seem to me to be typecasting all whites as powerful and all non-whites as not. And that is nonsense. I mean, you take this alleged confrontation in London, who did have the most power and status there? Sam Kerr, the rich superstar athlete on a big night out, or that poor Bobby trying to deal late at night with a stroppy athlete allegedly arguing over taxi fare and vomit in the back seat. But I listened today to ABC Talkback, checked on Twitter, all the people arguing that calling someone a stupid white bastard isn't racist, when they would destroy you if you said black. And I reckon it's because of a cultural movement that I've warned about on this show for years. This new anti-white racism, now anti-Jewish racism too, that's swept through Western universities and the left here and in the US and Canada and Britain. It is so strong that our ABC could cheerfully screen this kind of stuff. You know, it's just a joke.
But white people are...
But I tend to agree.
Yeah, can you elaborate?
As a mother, I can. White people are...
Right, okay. Andrew?
Well, I've never actually met a white person, but I do agree. White people, they're...
We've put in the beeps, but okay, a joke, calling them whites a C word. But what's taught in Western universities is not, and it's worse. You take author and academic Dante King giving a lecture on whiteness just last month at his university, the University of California, San Francisco.
Whites are psychopaths, and their behavior represents an underlying biologically transmitted proclivity with roots deep in their evolutionary history.
Then there's the American psychiatrist who gave a lecture at Yale, one of the world's top universities, saying all whites were bad and she dreamed of killing some.
It was also public service. I had fantasies of unloading a revolver into the head of any white person that got in my way, burying their body, and wiping my bloody hands as I walked away relatively guiltless. With a bouncing myself, like I did the world a favor.
Anti-white racism is also getting corporate support. Coca-Cola asked the employees to take a course by academic Robin DiAngelo, best-selling author of White Fragility, who told white staff to be less white because being less white was to be less oppressive, less arrogant, less certain, and less ignorant, as if all whites are all those terrible things. And some race activists even preach that whites aren't really human.
All white people are racist. I believe that white people are born into not being human.
In Chicago, the now former mayor said she wouldn't talk to white reporters, only black or brown ones. And now a play with Game of Thrones star Kit Harington, a play in London, is keeping 2 nights just for black audiences so they can enjoy the play without, quote, the oppressive white gaze. Can you imagine the riots if West End theatres bland blacks? I mean, seriously. This is the hypocrisy. This is the new racism that Sam Kerr has forced us to confront, whether she actually said what's reported or not. So, watch the left squirm, watch Labor make excuses. She's a hero. But do not let them get away with it. Racism is racism, whoever the target. It is a poison every time. Barnaby Joyce in a second, but for now, Donald Trump is going to be the Republicans' candidate in November's US election and the hot favourite to become president again because his only rival, Nikki Haley, has just dropped out after getting thrashed in the primaries we covered yesterday. But she still wouldn't endorse her former boss.
It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. Joining me is Sean Spicer, who was Donald Trump's White House spokesman the first time he was president. Sean Spicer, great to see you again. Look, Nikki Haley has bowed out of the race, so Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. I mean, not that there was much doubt about that, but it is now on. She said he had to do something to win back the kind of people that were supporting her. Does he need to do anything about that?
Andrew, when you look at the exit polls, take Virginia, for example, 43% of her support came from independents, 25% came from Democrats, and then the rest, the small minority, was from Republicans. She wasn't running away with this with Republicans. 78% of Donald Trump's support came from Republicans. NBC News did an exit poll. And of the people who voted for Donald Trump in 2020, 97% say they're still going to vote for him again in 2024. When you look at Joe Biden, they asked the same question to him. 85% of the people that said that who had voted for him in 2020 will do it again. It's Joe Biden that actually has the problem putting that coalition back together. And you look, it's kind of disparate, right? So it's somewhat degree of black men, young voters. You've got a lot of places around the country where the Israeli-Hamas conflict is taking its toll on Biden's policies. Younger voters, Muslim and Arab American voters that don't like it. So the thing that I found interesting about her comment was that Donald Trump's coalition, especially among Republican voters, is very, very strong. He doesn't need to win Democrats. And that's, by and large, who was voting for Nikki Haley because there wasn't a contest on the other side.
That's very interesting, Sean. I was also struck by his more measured tone in his last two big speeches. And this time he laid out he didn't attack Nikki Haley anymore. He doesn't need to do that. He went straight for setting out what he thought the agenda would be for this election campaign. And I was struck by how big immigration, illegal immigration, people pouring across the border. It's unbelievable, the numbers, how big that featured in his pitch for re-election.
Well, look, I live in Virginia, and it was the #1 issue for voters going to the polls yesterday. The reason is simple, Andrew. It's not just what it used to be 10, 15 years ago, where the issue was jobs and people coming into this country. It's the fentanyl pouring in. Just the other day, we had a Venezuelan who is illegally in this country rape a 14-year-old girl. The effects of illegal immigration make every single state in America a border state. You look at a state like New Hampshire up in New England, they're feeling the effects of fentanyl like no one else. That they know what it's like. They are feeling the consequences of this. And for so many people, they were focused on the left on just the number of people coming in. And it's not just that. Just yesterday, there was breaking news that the Biden administration has flown in, not let in, flown in on airplanes, 320,000 people from other countries. Now, think about this for a second. I grew up in the state of Rhode Island. We've got about 1 million people there. That's a third of the entire state of illegals that were flown into this country. Why were they flown? And it was done in secret. What is if there is no other plausible explanation than trying to give these people asylum so that they can become American voters?
Well, sometimes when you say that, Sean, I sometimes say, is that a conspiracy theory? But I got to say, I'm racking my brains to figure out why Joe Biden hasn't actually stemmed the millions, and I mean literally millions of illegal immigrants coming over the border. I mean, what's a country if it doesn't have borders? And look, your explanation seems to make more sense than anything else I've heard. I do not get it.
The thing that you have to understand, Andrew, and a lot of Americans don't understand this, is that once you are granted asylum, you are automatically on a 5-year path to becoming a citizen. Automatically, full stop. Nothing else has to happen. So the Biden administration has been pushing policies that will allow immigration officials, not judges, but officials, to grant asylum. And for a lot of people, they think, okay, that's fine, that's nice. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is it's an automatic 5-year pathway to citizenship. What happens when you become a citizen? Boom, you get to vote.
Well, I note that just before I went to Israel, Mike Pompeo, Donald Trump's former Secretary of State, was in Israel too. So it seems to me he's already making the pitch, or maybe he's had a nod that he could be back in business again with Donald Trump, that maybe the team's getting back together. I do not know. But Sean, I was a big admirer of Donald Trump's foreign policies when he was president. People might have, and I had problems with his style, with his rhetoric and all that kind of thing, but his foreign policies I thought were great. Can you just reassure me? He seems to say, he's been saying he's going to stop the war in Ukraine instantly. The only way he could do that is by denying Ukraine the means to defend itself. and has said much the same. He could stop the war in Israel, which seems to me, again, to stop Israel from getting the win against Hamas. Is this really Donald Trump? Is this the Donald Trump that we're going to get?
I think you're going to get Donald Trump who likes making a deal, right? And you saw that. The one thing that I've told people is there was a reason for 4 years, Andrew. If you think about it, the only time in recent history since Putin's come to power that hasn't annexed land or gone to war were the 4 years that Donald Trump was in office. There was no issue with Hamas going after Israel. In fact, it was the opposite. The Abraham Accords were creating peace in the Middle East. China, I was there when President Trump fired rockets on Syria and then sat up and went and had dessert with Xi Jinping and said, sorry, I had to excuse myself. We had to go fire rockets on. They were worried. He kept them off balance. And that's the key, is that they fear Donald Trump. And that's what gets him to the table. And he knows it, whether it's Putin or Xi Jinping. He can bring these folks to the table and say, enough is enough. We're going to cut a deal. We're going to figure out how to do that. Now, do I think all of this can happen in 24 hours, as he suggests? Maybe, maybe not. But I do think that they're going to take him seriously, unlike Joe Biden. They realized after that failed withdrawal out of Afghanistan that he was not, that there wasn't a degree of strength there that had been there for Trump.
Well, finally, Sean Spicer, when you were his press sec, you had the bad luck. It was a ragged operation on his part initially. He had the wrong people in the wrong jobs, and it was a nightmare, and he seemed to be all over the shop and rattled by the fact that he wasn't getting welcomed, that it was so hostile from the media and all that. Do you think he'll be a better president this time around than he was in the first time?
Yes, for the reasons that you just mentioned. I think he didn't come to Washington with a core group of folks because he wasn't a politician. He assumed the best in a lot of people, both on Capitol Hill and within his own team. And there were a lot of people that came with their own agendas and said, that's great. Now I'm going to execute what I think needs to get done, not his agenda. He has learned how to get things done in Washington, in politics. He has learned the right people to bring on board on his team, and he has learned who he can trust on Capitol Hill.
Well, all very interesting. Let us see what we shall see, because the wind is behind his back, and I think President Donald Trump will be in the White House again. Sean Spicer, thank you so much indeed for your time.
You bet. Good to see you again, Andrew.
Coming up, I've got some bad news, and I'll also discuss why we seem so determined to make ourselves poor over an irrational fear of fossil fuels. Another crazy court decision. Barnaby Joyce is up next. Get the bad stuff over first. I want to take a moment here to acknowledge the death of Lance Corporal Jack Fitzgibbons, the only son of former Defence Minister Joel Fitzgibbon. Now, Lance Corporal Fitzgibbon was a member of our Special Forces, died in a training accident at RAAF Base Richmond when his parachute didn't open properly. Joel Fitzgibbon had his statement on his son's death read out today by the ADF's acting Special Operations Commander.
We are devastated and heartbroken by the loss of our wonderful Jack. Serving in the Special Forces was Jack's dream job, and we take some comfort from the fact that he died serving his nation in the uniform of the Australian Defence Force. Jack was a dedicated, highly skilled and courageous soldier. He was an experienced parachutist. Our lives will never be the same without Jack, but we will always remain proud of him and his many achievements.
That statement was actually written by Joel Fitzgibbon about his son. Just how this accident happened is, of course, being investigated. My heart goes out to Joel. I was by chance on a holiday with him last year. He's a lovely man. And, well, I don't know what to say. Joining me is our Thursday regular guest, Barnaby Joyce, the Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs and former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby, Jack Fitzgibbon volunteered to serve his country, has lost his life. What a terrible loss for his family and a loss for us all, really.
Yeah, well, for him and Diane, for Joel and Diane, this is terrible. I mean, for every father, for every mother, the loss of their child is an unsurmountable grief. What we can say is Fitzgibbon family have done so much for our nation, the defence of our nation, service of our nation, and Jack was a splendid example of that. And for his service, he has paid the ultimate sacrifice. And obviously, I know Joel, and so do all of you. Joel's a good bloke. He's a good mate of mine, and I think we all are there. It's in our thoughts and our prayers for the family of this tragic time.
Well said. Awkward segue, but Barnaby, let us go to the politics of the day. We seem to be here determined to get a little poorer every day, to be honest. Santos now, the gas giant, it's tried for 10 years to get up its $3.5 billion Narrabri gas project, New South Wales. You wonder why gas companies bother still investing here. But now 2 out of 3 federal court judges have upheld an appeal against this project lodged by some traditional owners, an objection, who say the project must be checked for what it does through global warming. And what makes this all so stupid, Barnaby, is that Australia is too small to make any measurable difference to global warming. And even the Albanese government itself has said so, with lawyers for the Commonwealth telling the federal court in another case, because Australia contributes a very small proportion of global greenhouse gas emissions, it lacks the necessary control to prevent or materially mitigate climate change or its impacts. Yet here we go again. This is killing us, Barnaby.
And we're going possibly to another surplus on the back of gas exports and coal exports and iron ore exports. And if we didn't have, beef and all these terrible carbon and methane emitting products, that if we didn't have them, we wouldn't have a surplus. We wouldn't have the money for your superannuation, your paid parental leave, and you wouldn't have the money for the NDIS, and you wouldn't have the money for so many aspects, which gives you the standard of living which we all enjoy. Now, I just don't know where this nation is going when it does things like this. We have to become as strong as possible, as quickly as possible. We have China breathing down our neck. The world is changing. You were talking about the Ukraine earlier on. Yet we seem to create these obstacles to make us poorer, to make us weaker. We're losing our capacity to refine fuel. We're losing our capacity to manufacture steel. We're losing our capacity to produce plastics. We're shutting down our aluminium refineries. And it's all based around this thing called energy. If you lock down our capacity to get affordable energy, you shut down Australia and make us vulnerable. So I hope they considered that at the court. I hope they consider that, because it all comes to naught if at the end we get a foot on our throat. Then you won't be worried about climate change. You'll be worried about the servitude of your children.
Look, anyone, you mentioned something there. I refer to people to Terry McCrann's column in the News Corp papers today, Herald Sun, for instance. It makes it clear, without, as you say, without these minerals and China buying them, we would be in so much economic strife, you wouldn't believe it. It's frightening how fragile this economy is. Barnaby, the Queensland RSL has written a new acknowledgement of country to be read out at Anzac Day ceremonies. And it goes like this. Today's warriors acknowledge the very first warriors who stood as the guardians of this ancient country in which we meet today. We salute their commitment to an unbroken line of duty that began tens of thousands of years ago and continues to this very day. And I wonder if that's really appropriate for Anzac Day when their warriors of the past, these Aboriginal warriors of the past, were actually fighting each other.
Well, I just don't like the idea of politicising Anzac Day, of saying, we've got to have these ameliorating issues, we've got to make addendums to what it is. What it is quite clear. It is people in Australian uniforms who went overseas, who domestically supported the defence of our nation, who's paid the supreme sacrifice, who were injured, who were maimed, whose families fell apart, whose wives left and partners left, all this pain that goes around the necessary defence of our nation. But it's a defence of Australia. It's those who've worn the Australian uniform. And to start always bringing in other items, like where do these things stop? And you can find a virtuous reason to bring it in, but then of course it just leads to the next virtuous reason, and the next, and the next, and the next. And we do something that nobody wants. We politicise Anzac Day.
Spot on, well said, Barnaby, and thank you for that tribute to Joel Fitzgibbons' family. I appreciate that very much. Thank you for your time. I just should note something here, just put a little marker there. Last month, the head of ASIO said he identified a former MP who'd been a traitor, who worked for a foreign power, later identified as China. And this traitor had tried to ensnare a Prime Minister's family member. He wouldn't say who it is, but last night in the Victorian Parliament, his former friend, Adam Somyurek, used parliamentary privilege to say he thought it was former federal Labor MP Anthony Byrne, who shared a Canberra apartment with former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd and had been a member of Parliament's Intelligence Committee and, Somyurek claimed, been a big leaker and was short of money after 2 divorces. Now, I should add that Somyurek did admit last night to the obvious he does have an axe to grind against Byrne for exposing him as a branch stacker, and he gave zero proof that Byrne actually was the traitor. We've approached Byrne for comment. He says he won't be commenting. Maybe he'll come on this show later, he says. But he did send us an article which notes that ASIO denied he was the MP of interest, well, denied he was the traitor. I wonder if this is an appropriate use of parliamentary privilege, to be frank, denouncing someone as a traitor, knowing you can't get sued when you don't actually have the hard evidence. But let's just put that in the marker for later. Maybe ASIO should name the traitor so that we don't actually keep pointing fingers. After the break, amazing pictures that you haven't been shown from Gaza, which you're told Israel is starving into submission. I think you're going to be surprised. Plus, Germany's Luftwaffe leader is embarrassed by being taped telling what the British are really up to in Ukraine. It's dynamite. Welcome back. Now, first, happy birthday to my wonderful producer, Tara Moroney, who I think thought I'd forgotten. I haven't. Now, in a second, those amazing pictures from Gaza. But first, here's a quick look at what's coming up on Sharry with Danica Di Giorgio.
A rift has emerged in the Albanese government. We've got the inside scoop from a Labor insider after concerns the party is imploding, plus the Matildas' so-called sweetheart caught in a racism row. I'll see you at 8.
Now, I want to show you some pictures from Gaza I've seen on no other TV station. It's bizarre how the West is blaming Israel more than Hamas for the war and the suffering in Gaza, which is caused by the Hamas slaughter of 1,200 Israelis on October 7, plus kidnapping 250 hostages, plus, and Hamas's promise to do it again and again. American Vice President Kamala Harris this week made clear she thought Israel was starving the people of Gaza, which is ruled by Hamas.
And the Israeli government must do more to significantly increase the flow of aid. No excuses. They must open new border crossings. They must not impose any unnecessary restrictions on the delivery of aid.
But 2 things about that. First, it's Hamas which just turned down a ceasefire deal backed by the US, where it releases the remaining Israeli hostages. It's held now for 5 months. Second, Israel is letting trucks of aid go into Gaza. This is the convoy yesterday, one of them, with no restrictions, say the Israelis, that's what they claim, other than inspections for possible weapons and so on, which might help to explain these pictures you won't have seen. Now, caution, these are pictures posted by the Israeli Army's Kogat unit, which works with civilians in Gaza and the West Bank. You might say it's propaganda. But this is a market in central Gaza, it says, a couple of weeks ago. I'm certainly not denying there are pockets of real hunger in Gaza, by the way, especially in the north. But look here, this is a market now in Rafah, in the south of Gaza, that this same Israeli unit says was shot just 4 days ago, this footage. Again, caution, it says it's genuine as far as I can tell from the online responses. For instance, there is no proof that it's fake or dated, old. You see people wearing winter clothes appropriate for this time of year. You see selling tomatoes that are in season now. It's very different, isn't it, from the picture you've been given of hunger and ruins everywhere by Israeli carpet bombing, allegedly. Although, again, yes, there is now also a tent city of refugees from the north of Gaza nearby Rafah. Now,
I won't take Israeli footage as gospel. I checked other footage, of course. Here is an unverified TikTok video posted 2 days ago by a Gaza resident talking about the soft honey biscuits for sale down there. Here is another unverified TikTok video from a local of Gaza who's found beans for sale at about 60 cents a can. Here is someone at the market actually selling the free food aid now being dropped on Gaza, which is supposedly for the starving. And here is a report posted by news.com AU just last week about that market, the bakery, the vegetables and the tomatoes.
There's plenty of demand since almost 1.5 million Palestinians have moved to the town, fleeing the north of the Gaza Strip. Here, tomatoes are on sale for 4 shekels a kilo, up from their usual price of 1 shekel, but still reasonable given the circumstances.
So, yes, the food is short, it's expensive, a lot of things are unavailable. But all that said, Gaza City, the whole stretch of Gaza is 40 kilometres or so long, north to south. So if you're starving up at Gaza City in the north, maybe try moving a few kilometres to where there is food, if you can, expensive though that food is. And one last thing I don't see reported much at all anywhere, if there are hold-ups of food aid coming in, some of it, maybe a lot, is because of Hamas and the Palestinian people. Truck drivers taking in that food find their trucks being looted, find themselves attacked, stoned, bashed. Some are warning others not to go there.
يا جماعة ما حدش يخش جوه الفلسطينيين ما خلوش ولا عربية اللي هم كسروها وزي ما انتم شايفين كده العربيات اتكسرت ما عادش نافعة طوب من جوه خرم الظهرية وده دم السواق زي ما انتم شايفين الكابينة ما عادش نافعة.
The World Food Programme has reported the same. Multiple attempts by people trying to climb aboard the trucks, gunfire, Gaza City, complete chaos and violence, trucks looted, a truck driver beaten. All of which suggests that the deaths from this swarming of a convoy last week probably did include people run over or crushed or shot by gunmen, as well as some shot when they did approach Israeli tanks nearby. Conclusion, the picture in Gaza is much more complicated than the one you see reported. And remember that most reporters in Gaza have to be nice to the Hamas terrorists or else. In fact, the BBC report on those deaths last week of that food convoy I showed quoted a supposed eyewitness who blamed the Israelis, of course, but now it turns out to have been an anti-Israeli activist working for an outlet funded by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which backs Hamas. And its Facebook page even seems to show him dining with a leader of the military wing of the Islamic Jihad terrorist group, Khalil al-Batini. Joining me is General Jack Keane, a retired 4-star general who served as Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army, is now Chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General Keane, thank you so much for your time. Why is Vice President Kamala Harris so hard on Israel when it's Hamas that started this war, it's Hamas that promises to keep slaughtering Jews, it's Hamas that's firing from behind civilians, and it's Hamas that's now refusing the latest ceasefire offer?
Yeah, well, I think what's happening in this country, there's a huge pressure on the Biden administration, you know, from the far left here, who are supporting the Palestinians and really are actually opposing Israel in the sense that they believe everything that's wrong that's happening in Gaza, particularly in terms of civilian suffering and civilian death, is all at the hands of the Israelis, and don't blame the Hamas for that at all. And that kind of political pressure, I think, is manifesting itself in the Biden administration, putting more and more pressure on the Israelis in terms of how they conduct operations. And certainly Kamala Harris, who usually as a vice president really doesn't speak out too much, just recently has been doing just that. And that's the motivation, I believe, behind what we're seeing.
Well, I'm not sure it's going to do any good. I was in Israel last week, General. I talked to leading politicians from both sides. I talked to the president, I talked to their top security people, the former head of their internal security. I saw everywhere an utter determination to fight until Hamas is destroyed, no matter what America says. Do you think that's a stupid position from Israel, or would you be advising the same if you were in the Israeli military?
No, that's absolutely what I've been saying since October the 7th. Let the Israelis run their military campaign that their national leadership in Israel has directed. And I think it's the right campaign in terms of destroying the effectiveness of Hamas. There's 6 battalions that are somewhat effective still in the Hamas organization out of 30. 4 of them are in the Rafah area, and 2 remaining, one in Han Yunis area in the south, and remnants of one up in Gaza City that they've been dealing with the 2 that are outside Rafah in the past few weeks. They haven't conducted the campaign in Rafah yet because they're attempting to move the civilians out of Rafah so they're not in the way. And also they're obviously in some kind of negotiations that have been stalled in terms of a ceasefire to release the hostages. But Israel has made the point, Andrew, despite the ceasefire, if that agreement is reached, it is temporary, hostages released, humanitarian aid provided, and then after that, Israel fully intends to go into Rafah to destroy the effectiveness of those remaining units, and it's likely where most of the principal leaders who are still alive are.
Bad news. Russia is now winning in the war in Ukraine, or at least it's pushing the Ukrainians back. It's got the upper hand in the battlefield, and the stakes have just got higher. French President Emmanuel Macron has been all over the shop, you know that. He now says European countries should stop being cowards and send troops to Ukraine to fight as well, to help the Ukrainians. And the head of Germany's Air Force was bugged and embarrassed by recordings of him saying British troops were already there.
Wenn es zum Beispiel darum geht, die Missionsplanung zu machen, ich weiß, wie es die Engländer machen, die machen es ja komplett im Reachback, die haben auch ein paar Leute vor Ort, das machen sie, die Franzosen nicht, also sie QCen auch die Ukrainer beim Beladen des Scalp.
General Keane, how embarrassing was that call?
Well, I think NATO's got to get their act together and determine what it is they're doing. I really don't think they're all that serious about sending ground troops. I do believe the Ukrainians would more than welcome air power because certainly they don't have the kind of air power they will eventually get when the F-16s show up. In terms of the characterization of the war, here's how I would express it. Russia has some initiative and has been able to achieve momentum in taking in limited pieces of territory, principally around Avdiivka, where there's a salient there, and the Ukrainians withdrew. But the Russians suffered staggering casualties, and they were not able to exploit that success in restoring operational maneuver and being able to move through the penetration they achieved and take significant amount of territory. Why? Because the operation culminated and they lost the ability to maneuver any further. So what we're seeing is positional warfare. The Russians are not winning this war, but clearly the momentum is on their side. The Ukrainians are defending quite naturally because they're husbanding their resources. They know full well they've received no assistance in 2 months whatsoever. The Russians outgunned them 4-1 on artillery shells, and they're going to have a depletion of their air defense systems. And if we don't get something to them soon, we're going to see bombing of major cities in Ukraine and successful bombing that we've not seen to date.
The Ukrainians have had tremendous success in the Black Sea using drone ships or drone boats. It's just been extraordinary, some of the vision we've seen too. But has Germany, the head of their Air Force, landed Britain in it by revealing, and I presume he knows what he's talking about, in this bug call that British troops are already on the ground in Ukraine training Ukrainians to fight. That is a big step up for British commitment in this war.
It certainly is, if that's a true story. Maybe their SAS are doing that kind of training. Obviously, that's a covert operation, not meant to be in the public domain, and revealing something like that is astounding. A NATO country revealing something on another NATO country, an allied partner, and shame on them for doing something like that, if this is a valid story.
Yes, I think Germany's effort in this war has been all over the shop as well. I mean, really, this has exposed some real weaknesses in Europe. But we shall see. I mean, they need to get their act into gear or Ukraine will be lost. General Jack Keane, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, great talking to you, Andrew. Thank you.
And after the break, justice for people sick of having neighbours steal flowers from their gardens. And the curse of Brittany Higgins strikes again. She's gone to hospital, so why does she keep making this such a public brawl when she's so fragile? Plus my book and bargain whiskey of the week, but you might have to fly to get that. Well, the curse of Brittany Higgins strikes again. Like I say, this case damages everyone it touches, and now it's Higgins who's been taken to hospital again. Higgins and her boyfriend flew in from France this week to attend court-ordered mediation sessions with former Defence Minister Linda Reynolds, who Higgins claimed had treated her badly after she complained to Higgins about being raped, Reynolds about being raped in her office by a fellow staffer, Bruce Lehrman. Lehrman denies the rape, never been proved in court. In fact, Higgins checked into hospital back then, and the prosecutor ruled that a second trial, after the first one was called off, could kill her, so that was that. Now Reynolds is suing Higgins and her boyfriend for defaming her, and these mediation hearings were postponed after just one day when Higgins checked herself into hospital again. She's now out. Joining me is the panel, James McPherson, Liz Storer, both of the late debate here on Sky News at 10 p.m. Liz, I don't understand. This has been the most incredible legal saga of a rape that's still not been proved, and I'm wondering why Higgins keeps trying to make this a public fight instead when she seems so fragile.
Well, her fragility is consistent with what the prosecutors in the original rape trial, which fell over, said, and that was that she wasn't up to prosecuting again. Charges were dropped. There was not going to be a retrial. Whereas in this case, she's being sued. So I don't know that she's really taking it public. She has no choice but to participate. And given that yesterday's mediation went for 9 hours, Andrew, it was Reynolds herself who today asked for a 2-week pause. She herself said it had been difficult and very tiring. It's curious because you'd think both parties would desperately want to settle this out of court, and yet after 9 hours of mediation yesterday, still no success.
No, there's much more involved than money, it seems to me, although Higgins did get $2.4 million from taxpayers over this bad treatment that she claims and Reynolds denies. Look, the whole thing's weird. But can I move on to a different sort of legal thing? James, the Me Too movement, this is my theory. It seems to me to have made police and prosecutors too scared to not believe anyone claiming to have been raped. I think we saw that in the George Pell case, for instance. And now 5 judges in New South Wales have criticised the Director of Public Prosecutions there for prosecuting men for rape in cases that were hopeless from the start. No real possibility of finding them guilty. The DPP denies this, but has now told her senior prosecutors to audit every sexual assault matter about to go to trial. Something seems wrong here, and some men have paid a terrible price, James.
Look, there's no doubt the Me Too movement has done a lot of good, but it's come with a price. The idea that you must believe all women provides a massive dilemma for courts, which need to be blind and need to weigh up evidence without any bias. So if you declare at the beginning you're going to believe one particular party, you've got a huge problem, and it seems like the New South Wales judiciary are pointing this out. And this has been known for quite some time, Andrew. I mean, there was a poll in the US in 2018 that found 58% of Americans were worried not just about women being sexually assaulted, but also about what the Me Too movement meant for men. There was another poll that found an overwhelming majority of men were too afraid to mentor women in the workplace for fear of accusations coming against them. And another poll found that the majority of men and women in the workplace didn't know how to behave towards each other because of this propensity to believe every interaction, if it was seen as being, indiscreet, was somehow a crime. And this has gone from the workplace right now through to the court system. It's not a bad thing that the DPP has said, look, let's audit every case we've currently got just to make sure we are treating these fairly. That it's a good thing to do, and it is a result of this propensity to believe one party over another, which is quite problematic.
Is that how you see it, Liz?
Look, there's no doubt that good men have been ruined over rape claims. The famous case of US Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh comes to mind. However, I think it's less of a Me Too thing and more of a common decency thing, that everyone ought to be loath to dismiss claims or disbelieve claims of rape due to the nature of the crime. Most people are very loath to be like, well, we just don't believe you. However, what the DPP are doing, I believe, is going, look, these are notoriously hard cases to prosecute. It's always been that way. There's no eyewitnesses. There's no CCTV footage. It is always a he said, she said case. And that is terribly difficult for anyone to get a win in court. They're simply recognising that, because obviously it's up to the prosecutors to decide at the very beginning, does the person whose case I'm prosecuting have enough to get this across the line in court? It's already hard to do so, but have they got what it takes? Is there a chance? Instead of simply saying, we're prosecuting because there's been a claim of rape. It makes perfect sense.
Well, yes, particularly in some of the cases I've read where the evidence seemed to go on the defendant's side rather than the accusers. But now to a happier case that interests my daughter very much, having lost some roses herself. A prominent architect in Sydney has been fined $450 for 3 times pinching a neighbour's lovely hydrangeas. She said she thought their property was boarded up. They actually put up security cameras the first time they found their beloved flowers snipped. James, do you understand this passion to find the hydrangea thief?
Well, having gone to the florist and bought flowers myself, I can well understand why you'd prefer to pinch them from someone's yard. Look, I think if you pinch someone's flowers one time, that's a compliment. But if you do it 3 times, as this person did, well, you're probably breaking the law at that point.
As a keen garden myself, I am on the side of justice in this case. Liz Storer, James McPherson, have a great show tonight. Now, take it from me, my book of the week, I was told by my producer, do a novel for once. Look, I'm sorry to sound like a bit of a wanker. Don Quixote, 400 years ago, written by a guy that was actually imprisoned by the Turks, by Muslim pirates in North Africa, and finally got back to Spain, wrote this book, Don Quixote, about, you think, why? How can you make a great novel? How can you make one of the greatest novels ever written still out of a guy that saw giants when it was actually a windmill, for instance, or saw in sheep actually an army, or saw in a peasant girl, oh, a princess, I must save her. And yet, he reminds me a bit of people like Bob Brown, the former Greens leader. I don't believe anything he says about the climate and all that, but the nobility of believing in that cause. It's like a priest, you might not believe in God, but look how they commit themselves. Or a rabbi, you respect that, and you find in this the respect for someone who does believe in something, even if it's away with the fairies. And the way it's written is just fantastic. It's just postmodernist, Part 1, Don Quixote. Part 2, written a sequel later. People are selling Don Quixote. I think I've read about you in another book, haven't I? Brilliant stuff. And my whiskey of the week, well, you've got to fly to Dubai to get it for only $44. I got it coming back from Penderyn from Wales. Now I thought, I've got to get that. So let's have a taste, see if you should go there too, or try to find it online. Sherrywood. maybe just go to Dan Murphy, see what they got. That's it from me. Coming up next, Danica Di Giorgio.